Nightmare Mountain, Chapter 9. We have to get going in this because we know Molly just found Glendon. Let's see what happens with him. His eyes were closed. Using every ounce of strength she possessed, she finally managed to get him on top of the snow. She removed her right mitten and put her hand on his throat, but her fingers were so numb she couldn't tell if there was a pulse beat or not. She opened his jacket, stuck her hand inside his shirt, and let out a sigh of relief. His heart was beating. He was still alive. But how was she ever going to get him back down to the ranch? He certainly couldn't walk, and he was much too heavy for her to carry. I have to try, Molly thought. He's unconscious. He needs a doctor. He wasn't bleeding, but she knew that it could be dangerous to move an injured person. What if he had broken bones or some kind of internal injury? She blew on her hands and rubbed them together, warming them enough so that she had some feeling in her fingers. Then slowly and carefully she felt Glendon's legs, first the right, then the left. There was no obvious problem. Next she felt his right arm. Everything there seemed okay too. But when she put her fingers on his left arm, Glendon moaned, and Molly could tell that the lower part of the arm was at a strange angle. She was sure his arm was broken. She knew she should put a splint on it to keep the broken bone from moving and doing more damage. She tried to think what she could use for a splint. Earlier, she could have used a tree branch. Now the few trees on this part of the mountain had been buried by the avalanche. She considered using the flashlight, but the bulb end was so much wider than the handle that it wouldn't work well. She decided the best thing to do was bind his arm with her plaid scarf. She unwound the scarf from her neck, hating to lose the warmth, but she positioned Glendon's arm as straight as she could and held it carefully in place as she wound the scarf around and around. She tucked the end of the scarf into Glendon's coat sleeve to secure it. The splint wouldn't get any awards from the Red Cross, but it would keep his arm at the right angle. Now all she had to do was figure out a way to transport Glendon to the lift. She decided to fashion a sled out of the Afghan. She spread the Afghan out on the snow next to Glendon and started to roll him onto it. He moaned softly when she moved him, and Molly prayed she was doing the right thing. What if he had a broken back or some other horrible injury that she couldn't detect? He might be paralyzed if she moved him incorrectly. She hesitated. If I don't move him, she thought, he's going to be dead. She had to take the chance. Taking a deep breath, she rolled him over until he was lying in the middle of the Afghan. She took the hat out of the pocket of the extra jacket and put it on Glendon's head, pulling the edges down over his ears as far as she could. She didn't dare try to put his broken arm through the jacket sleeve, but she stuck his other arm through a sleeve and laid the jacket across his chest. Then she wrapped the edges of the Afghan around him, tucking them tightly underneath his back. She used to wrap her dolls that way, papoose style. She took hold of the corner of the Afghan that stuck out beyond Glendon's shoes and started to pull, planting her feet firmly in the snow. She leaned forward, tugging at the Afghan. Glendon didn't move. Molly clenched her teeth and yanked as hard as she could. The Afghan tore. Molly, who was straining forward with all her might, sprawled face down in the snow. Fighting back tears, she got up and tried pulling Glendon by his feet. He moved slightly and groaned, but the effort caused her shoulder to throb unbearably. Her feet sank through the crust of the snow with every step, making it even more difficult to move. Bucky whined and leaned against her. She wished there was a way to use some of Bucky's strength, but she couldn't think how to do it. Too bad she didn't have a rope or a leash. She could tie one end around Glendon's ankles and the other around Bucky and let the dog help pull if she could. But she had no rope and no leash and not enough energy to drag Glendon by herself. She tried again, bending over to grasp Glendon's ankles and tugging while she stepped backwards. It went better than last time. She moved him 4 or 5 feet before she had to stop and rest. After she caught her breath, she grasped Glendon's ankles again and then hesitated. Was she going in the right direction? She had been so frantic to find Glendon, she hadn't paid any attention to which way she was walking while she searched for him. She looked around. It was completely dark now, and Molly was no longer positive where the lift was. She turned on her flashlight and moved it slowly across the surface of the snow. Ice crystals sparkled in the light, sending up flecks of pink and gold, but Molly was too scared to appreciate the beauty of the scene. The whole terrain was changed from avalanche. Nothing looked familiar. She didn't see the lift cables. She didn't see the top of the big boulder. Those were the only two landmarks she was sure of, and she couldn't find either one of them. She couldn't even retrace her own tracks because she and Bucky had crisscrossed the surface of the snow too many times before Bucky caught Glendon's scent. She knew she'd be lucky to have enough strength to drag Glendon to the lift if she went in a straight line. If she zigzagged all over the mountain, she would never make it. I'm lost, Molly thought. I'm half frozen and Glendon's unconscious and nobody is looking for us because they don't know we're up here. Every inch of her body hurt. She considered leaving him there wrapped up in the Afghan while she tried to find the lift alone. By herself she could walk much faster, but she still wasn't sure which direction to go. What if she didn't find the lift? What if she only succeeded in wandering farther away? Then no rescuers would come, and she and Glendon wouldn't be able to help each other stay warm, and they'd probably both die of the cold. She shouldn't have come back up here without completing the call to the sheriff. She knew that now. If his line hadn't been busy, a search party would already be looking for them. She should have waited. She should have stayed until the call went through. But Glendon might have died if she had waited any longer. As it was, he might never recover. People get brain damage if they go too long without oxygen. She'd learned that in science class last year. No, she had been right to rush back with Bucky and dig Glendon out of the snow. They might be lost and cold, and Glendon was still unconscious, but at least he was alive. She wondered where the man was. Did he make it down the mountain ahead of the avalanche, or was he, along with the truck and the llamas in it, buried somewhere beneath the snow? She felt sorry for the llamas, but she couldn't help them now. She could only hope to save herself and Glendon. Since she couldn't find her way back to the lift in the dark, she decided to wait until morning. By morning, search parties would surely be looking for them. And if not, at least she'd be able to see and could find the lift and get down and go for help. She knew she should keep moving. If she could keep walking, keep her body moving, she wouldn't freeze to death. She had seen a movie on television once where the hero made himself keep walking, even with a sprained ankle. But what about Glendon? He couldn't move. She couldn't walk around all night keeping warm while she let Glendon lie there in a snowbank and freeze to death. She pushed Glendon over until he lay on only half of the Afghan. "Here, Bucky," she said. Bucky was there instantly. Molly lay down on the Afghan beside Glendon, getting as close to him as she could, and then she patted Glendon's chest. "Down, Bucky," she said. "Down, here." Bucky leaned over and sniffed Glendon. Molly reached out and stroked Bucky on the back. Particles of ice clung to his fur, and she wondered if he would really provide some insulation and warmth, or if the dog was just as cold as she was. "Come on, boy," Molly said, and she patted Glendon's chest again. Gingerly, Bucky eased himself forward and lay down, with his back paws on Glendon and his front paws and head on Molly. Molly pulled the side of the Afghan up over her shoulder. "Good dog," she said. "Good Bucky." Bucky laid his muzzle on Molly's shoulder and licked her cheek. His tongue felt warm, and Molly put her arm up across Bucky and hugged him. If we get out of this mess, Molly thought, Bucky deserves a whole box of dog biscuits. Maybe even a T-bone steak. She couldn't stop shivering, but by huddling close to Glendon and Bucky, she was able to keep her teeth from chattering. She closed her eyes and wondered if Aunt Karen was still alive. Maybe by now Uncle Phil had called Mom again. If he had, surely she would come home this time. She wouldn't stay in Japan now, not when Molly was lost in an avalanche. Of course, she reminded herself nobody knew about the avalanche yet. Molly's head hurt and she couldn't think clearly. She was thirsty too, and hungry. Maybe she had a headache because she hadn't eaten anything all day. She wished she'd brought some food with her. She'd trade her next 5 years' allowance for a steaming cup of hot chocolate, with whipped cream on it, and a sprinkling of nutmeg. In fact, she'd even eat a plateful of peas or lima beans or beets. She tried to think of the worst food in the whole world. Cauliflower. Yes, right now, she was so hungry, she would even eat cauliflower. She scooped up some snow and put it in her mouth, feeling it melt quickly on her tongue. I might freeze to death, she thought, but at least I won't die of thirst. But it was no consolation. She wondered if Glendon would still hate her. If they were rescued, there was no doubt she had saved his life. Would he appreciate it, or would he just be as mean as before? She wondered why he was so unhappy. She knew it wasn't just her visit that was bothering her about him. Something was making him this way. Something had happened to Glendon that made him so resentful. But what? She didn't think it was because his parents were divorced. Her own parents were divorced, and she wasn't mad at the world. And Glendon was fortunate that Uncle Phil had remarried. Even though Aunt Karen wasn't Glendon's birth mother, Molly knew she loved him. And he loved Aunt Karen too, or he wouldn't have been crying in the hayloft. If they were rescued, she planned to ask a lot of questions. If they were rescued. It was, she knew, a very big if. And that's where I'm going to have to stop in Chapter 9. That was Part 1. Chapter 9 is a longer chapter, so I'm going to put into 2 parts. So next time when you look for a video, look for Chapter 9, Part 2.